Thanks. That's really nice of you to say. I'll give a little background, maybe give a little lore. I think sometimes I assume everybody knows everything because I spent the first couple years on social media, treating it like a share. I'd spent the few years leading up to my, foray into social media creation, immersed in recovery. For me, my trauma healing path began with dealing with my substance abuse issues, which were quite substantial. I had a therapist who said, you have CPTSD and the trauma's like a broken leg, and all of these drugs and all of this alcohol is you just kicking your leg every day, and that if you really want to start to heal the leg, you have to stop kicking it. And so I started making content as though I was just sharing in a circle. I was sharing my life. I was talking about myself, but talking about myself in the way that people might talk about themselves in healing communities. I had realized that there was extreme power and potency in healing together, in healing through shared experience. In the sharing of ourselves, we give permission to others, to also share. And that I realized, like going to AA meetings, there might be 5 people that talk, but there's all these people that are gaining wisdom, that are gaining healing from just listening. And so I started talking about myself. I started talking about my family. I started talking about my traumas. And it went really well. I never really expected anybody to listen. I was doing it more just out of this burning desire to be seen and heard in the version of myself that I had become, that I no longer wanted to be beholden to these previous versions of myself. My family didn't want to hear any of it. And so there was actually, some kind of revenge aspects. I remember I wrote my dad an email one time telling him I was going to turn him into an archetype of a narcissistic abuser because that's what he was. But something happened along the way. In early 2023, I got COVID. And I emerged from COVID with a completely dysregulated nervous system. There are a lot of studies kind of linking long COVID or a kind of extended experience, of whatever, for those of us that have suffered trauma. To me, it was like all of this fear and paranoia in my body. Prior to that, I hadn't felt a lot of nervous system dysregulation. I talked more about the mind and about trauma from an intellectual perspective and kind of rewriting our stories and various ways that we can begin the work. But these last 3 years, I'm not joking, I think my nervous system has been in fight or flight without stopping. Right, that I've been living with so much body anxiety and body paranoia that it's really affected what I do. It's humbled me. It's made me question, this idea of healing. This idea of, it just kind of upended what I was doing. And so I didn't stop. I'm still out here doing the work that I think is important. But this idea of relaxation has been really fleeting. I'm lucky to have love in my life, and when I'm around my girlfriend, I find that I can kind of regulate or co-regulate a little bit better than when I'm alone. But I would wonder if other people have had that experience. I was helping somebody in Ukraine in about 2022 prior to this for me, and she was describing the very thing I went through, and I remember not really being able to understand what she was saying. And I've felt that too, as I've tried to explain to people what it feels like for me. And I haven't really wanted to talk too much about it because, my content has changed immensely in the last couple of years from what I was doing. When I first started out, I didn't really want to talk politics. I wanted to talk healing. I wanted to talk trauma. I wanted to talk narcissistic parents. I had realized that so much of the content on narcissistic abuse was about romantic relationships, but it left the discussion about what to do when they're your parents largely out of it. And I did that, but I was doing that with this kind of fury almost, that there was all of this anger that I had, that I just needed to be seen, I needed to be heard, I needed to get the truth out, and kind of screaming into the digital ether seemed to be calming. It seemed to help, it seemed to work, the creation of community, the feelings of validation. But over time, social media attention becomes its own form of kind of like a drug, right? Its own form of dissociation. And so I've been trying to manage that as this has become, I guess, somewhat of a career. You know, I mentioned on this video that my girlfriend's linking a bunch of other social media platforms. We started a new Facebook page. I haven't been on Facebook in years. You know, linking to Blue Sky, to YouTube. I'm going to start cross-posting. But I really just wanted to share that because it's been really difficult for me, and it's been something I've almost been ashamed of, you know, in fact. And when something is shameful, we tend to hide it. And in that hiding, it starts this whole other kind of rhythm of existing. And so I'm just going to close by thanking all of you. You know, it's been an unexpected part of my life to, you know, acquire all these followers, but more importantly, interact with so many fucking people. It's insane. And it's almost indescribable for me to understand that I live inside people's minds, right? That people know me that I don't know, and I've had an impact on all of these people. And I don't say that out of a place of ego. I say that out of a place of gratitude. And so thank you for letting me share a little bit of this. It's been on my mind a lot lately because, you know, I checked myself into rehab in May of 2017, which means I've had this whole last almost 10 years without a drink. And as the world kind of continues to crumble, I almost miss it, you know.